What's up, nerds? Review time.
Is it worth it?
Starbrand is a 3 energy time power card that reads ongoing. Your opponent has +3 power at each other location. Overall impressions of Starbrand. I like this card. I might love it, but I will say I'm a little biased. If you've been watching my channel for a while, or you've had the unfortunate scenario where you had to watch my first videos,
This is disgusting. This is awful in every way.
don't go watch them, please. You'll know that I made a bunch of decks that used cards that were hard to use. An example would be like the old school Zero Destroyer type deck. I just really like those types of decks, and I always felt like they were like one card short. I think Starbrand is that card. Also, I don't want to get too deep into this because it's overall impressions, but Starbrand makes a lot of other cards in the game better, which is cool. Some cards come out and they just make like a deck better, or like MODOK is the most obvious example. MODOK comes out and it's like, that's a great card, but only for discard. Starbrand, I think, makes like 5 or 6 other cards much better, and lets you have variations in archetypes where he would usually go. For instance, Sauron, Surtur, Skaar. You could have like 4 or 5 different variations of those decks now, and it's a secret buff to Venom.
Oh, shit.
Which we will get into later. But first, let's take a look at your hot takes. First thing here, Arky says Enchanters will be everywhere, .. exclamation point. And he's totally right. Don't play ongoing decks for like the next week, basically. You're just gonna get screwed by the collateral damage. Yeah, I think that's right. Donnie T-Rex has one of the worst jokes I've ever seen. Sorry, Donnie, that was terrible. But he makes a really good point here. He's a cheap powerhouse with a tiny downside. I do think it's smaller. The downside is not as harsh as it seems. And if you don't turn it off, it's just like a big Mr. Fantastic. I get the comparison. J No Stack says Starbrand will get the "oh my god, this card is cracked" treatment for a bit, be meta relevant for a couple of weeks, and then fade into obscurity, but I'm still going to get him. I do think a lot of creators do this bullshit. I try not to on this channel, but I mean, the intro card I have for my deck highlight videos makes fun of this very thing, where Starbrand's going to come out and you're going to see, I'm not going to name them, but pretty much all the other top creators be like in the thumbnail and just say, "oh my god, this card is meta defining. It's changing how we play Marvel Snap." But it's not. It's sure, the card might be good. Any card really might be good, but there hasn't been many cards that really deserve that sort of thumbnail and that title and that exaggerated treatment. But I do disagree. I don't think this card's going to fade into obscurity. I think it's more flexible than people seem. I think it's going to help out more archetypes, or give archetypes a wider range of play than people are considering, and that will keep him relevant for a while, I think. Kurgan with an absolute spicy take. This is what I want here. Sauron players huffing massive amounts of hopium with this release. I disagree. Sure, maybe Sauron isn't going to be the best deck, but I don't think Sauron players are huffing massive amounts of hopium, because this card is actually going to be very good in that deck. Now, whether or not that deck is like, becomes a top meta contender, it's kind of irrelevant. I think if you play Sauron, you like that style of deck, I think this card's great for you. And also, it's going to be good. It's going to allow Sauron decks to branch out into like 4 or 5 different variations. So I get what you're saying, Kurgan. I disagree. And onto the other side of the spectrum here, Noah says this card is going to need a nerf, either +4 to other locations or 9 power Starbrand. Is going to be good. Possible. I'm not sure this is going to need a nerf though, because usually when a card that comes out and it makes like a bunch of other cards good, they usually hit the other cards that enable the new card to be good before they hit the actual card itself, which is a little weird. +4 to other locations would really make this card, like, the downside would be super duper bad. +4, you're playing a 3/2 if you don't turn them off. That's pretty shit. But as far as 9 power goes, it's a nerf to Skaar and Surtur, but it's not a nerf to any other scenario where you would want this card. So if they do take it down to 9 power, I actually don't think that's too bad. Rabba Rouser says, hot take, I prefer Gladiator. I get it. Gladiator goes in pretty much any deck you want to put him in, really, because the downside of Gladiator sometimes just isn't a downside at all, and you don't have to do anything to make the card work, Gladiator work. So I could see preferring Gladiator. But overall, I think Starbrand is actually just a better card. Parthorax says, smash. Does that mean you want to fuck this card?
Ugh.
If so, that's fine. Different strokes for different folks. There's people who dress up in fox outfits and fuck each other, so sure. But if you mean smash as in like, you think this is good, also sure. If you mean smash as in this guy kind of looks like a flesh-toned Hulk.
What the fuck is that?
Yeah, I agree. Undid Beard saying not worth the risk of wasting keys just for a big boy. Fire Hair, on the other hand, has some real uses. I get not wanting to waste keys on a card that is just a big card. It's not really interesting, doesn't add any dynamic plays to whatever it is you're trying to do with them, but I don't think Fire Hair is good. I think it's just a weird sort of misery type card, and I don't like misery. I think it's a bad card. Sure, there are scenarios where misery is good, like the mill decks, the mill destroy decks, but show me a misery deck that's like crushing people or is like really, really good that you would take to a tournament. Yeah, you can't. So yeah, I don't think Fire Hair is as good as Undead Beard says, but I get the sentiment. And finally, we have an interesting one from Zed Minor or Michael, whatever he wants to be called. Because of the power in other lanes, opponents will have to think twice before using Shang. Fair enough. Maybe they have an answer to your Starbrand and it's not protected. Maybe they just bail on that lane and then just try to put power in the other two lanes. Sure. It's a interesting way to look at it. I didn't really consider that until I read this comment, so good on you, Zed Minor. All right, the good and the bad, the upsides and the downsides. Listen, this section of the video is going to be really short because the card says it's good stuff and bad stuff on it. There's no intricacies here. The good, power, duh. Don't need to say anything else. The second thing here, huge archetype boost. Sort of went over this already, but Sauron decks, it makes it to where you can branch out to like 4 or 5 different ways to play it. We'll get into that in a second in the example decklist area. But it's also a boost to any sort of zero style deck. It's a boost to those old school like Venom, Arnim, Zola, Taskmaster type decks, which is the third point here. So we'll just bleed into that. You might not remember it, but there used to be decks that they're basically Sauron decks. Before Sauron, they would use Venom in the place of Sauron and just eat the cards with bad downsides and then spread those to different lanes with Arnim Zola or copy its power with Taskmaster. And I really liked those decks. They were really cool. So yeah, it's actually a secret buff to a dead archetype, and it's a crazy good boost to Zero, Sauron, Surtur, Skaar, a bunch of different types of decks and playstyles. On to the bad. The bad part of this card is on the fucking card. So the ongoing, duh. And the second thing here, I don't know what else. If we haven't covered it in the hot takes or I haven't mentioned it yet, let me know what the downside of this card is, other than the fact that if you don't turn it off, it's bad. All right, this is the good part. I usually not too excited about the example decklist area because the cards that come out are usually like archetype specific. This card is too, but I mean, it's like MODOK, for example, comes out. It's like, here's an example discard deck. Duh. But here we can basically show you different ways to play sort of the same archetype. And I think that's really interesting. First thing here, it's a Sauron Zero deck with Surtur and Skaar. Not too much to be said here, except for the fact that Bruce Banner is here. And I think that's really cool. Bruce Banner, I don't have it, but I think if you have it, I would consider adding Bruce into all these types of decks now. It's going to be a big boy. And what it does, aside from just being another giant thing, is now you have so many cards that the opponent has to consider dealing with that maybe you don't even need armor or Cosmo. As you can tell, they're not in any of these decks. Because if you have Bruce in one lane, Starbrand in another, Surtur in a third, what are they going to do about every single lane? You can't Shang everything.
Oh, hey, fuck you.
So second deck here, it's the Zabu variation. Basically, we're taking out Skaar for Ares. You're probably going to have more power than the opponent. And we're getting a little lower curve with Zabu on the lower end of the deck. Other than that, it's pretty obvious what we're doing here. The third thing here is what I'm actually really excited about trying is basically instead of Enchantress, you're playing Venom, which then lets you do some really broken things on the last turn of the game. So we have Martyr instead of Hydra Bob because we're gonna eat it with Venom and we want that extra power. And as you can tell, the idea here is just play like Starbrand into Typhoid or, I don't know, Lizard or whatever. Eat the stuff with Venom. Maybe play Red Skull out on turn 5, and then split Venom into the other 2 lanes, or copy Venom's power. I think this is a really cool and actually a tricky way to play this sort of deck. All right, my ultimate recommendation on whether or not you should get Starbrand. So as far as tokens go, should you spend resources to get Starbrand? I think the only way you can say yes for sure is if you have Skaar, you have Typhoid Mary, you have Red Skull, and that's about it. I think if you add those 3 cards, I don't think you'll be too upset with spending 6k tokens on Starbrand. Other than that, I wouldn't get it until you get those other cards. Now, as far as keys go, using keys to open Starbrand. If you don't have Skaar or Phastos, I think Starbrand is a great pickup. Using 4 keys to get 2 of those cards is great. Phastos isn't used as much, but it's a cool card to have. And especially if you don't have Skaar, you're probably going to want to play Skaar, and at least half of the decks that have Starbrand are going to run Skaar. So yeah, spending 4 keys to get those 2 cards, super good deal. But if you do have Skaar, you do have Phastos, I would only spend keys to get Starbrand if you have every other card you need already, as well as Skaar. So basically, if you have Skaar and Phastos, take the advice I just said about tokens. There you go. But yeah.
Yeah, that's about it. Yeah.